And that's basically what I want to show with the image I have. Python is a 30-year-old technology or a 35-year-old technology. Thus, MicroStrategy was founded as a consulting firm in 1989. And then they just kind of developed along and built a tool. At some point, Mike Saylor said, no, stop, we're starting completely new. Use all the experiences we've gathered and build a completely new server from scratch. With a focus on SQL engine, with a focus on client-server technology, and clearly we rely on modular data. It was really groundbreaking at the time. Were you the first to use the web MicroStrategy? And then eventually the time came when Tableau practically became big. And it was said that modeling data is too complicated, it's not worth it, blah, blah, blah. And then the enterprise concept kind of fell by the wayside. The beauty of this AI now, the checked data, the validated data with secure access suddenly become much, much more important. Why? If we know the data is correct, it's much easier for the AI to make actual decisions. And that's really the point. When I had Arthur on the train, I knew, okay, that was in Düsseldorf. Now I have half an hour to make MicroStrategy appealing to him. And I think now is a good time to show how I did it.
Yeah, that's nice. That's what we're here for exactly. You need to present down
Slides
there too.
share screen, right? Like this.
Exactly.
Screen.
Yes. And then when I see that everything is ready, then okay. Matthias confirmed that data modeling is also unimportant in Tableau. But of course, it is true that the marketing looked different.
All right,
So
I
Daniel,
think, yeah, okay, let's get started.
I see with you exactly. That looks
I'll
really
start
good.
here. This is the login page for MicroStrategy. I'm logging in as an administrator. So now comes the tool that I'm using for the first time.
So you have it locally, it's over the web, but it's basically just a server running on your end.
Exactly. The server is running on a 30 euro remote box on the internet. But for my purposes, that's more than enough.
So
now, let's open the MicroStrategy data wizard. That's what I called it. It's a highly promoted report where we can choose which attributes we want to display, which metrics we want to show, and how we want to filter. So I'll start with something really simple, call center. Then let's go into time, select a month as a tenant. Let's go ahead and pick costs.
The whole thing, I mean the data model, is it still semantically modeled in MicroStrategy, or is it
exactly that's semantically modeled? I'll come back to that later. Maybe I can give a quick preview. I also like doing that.
I'll also ask a few silly questions since I haven't seen it yet, so that's okay. I hope some of them
love all kinds of questions
and
even critical questions from the audience. They are extremely welcome.
Yeah, as I said, even if I should talk a little less, if you guys actually came for Daniel, I'll let him finish.
Okay, so we have the semantic representation of MicroStrategy's attributes here. Now, if we take a look inside
but you have to admit, it does look a bit 90s.
Yes, indeed. There's also the workstation in the end. That's a more modern version of what we're seeing here. But I'm an 80s kid and I'm slowly adjusting to the new stuff. But it's coming along slowly. There are now some things where I have to clearly say the workstation, that's the name of this tool, has some really good solutions ready. This is especially true for object management. It allows us to deploy much easier between development, testing, and production phases, making everything more transparent and traceable. But now for me, this presentation is a special one. Why? Because I'm used to talking to the MicroStrategy experts. Now, for the first time, I'm talking to MicroStrategy experts and people who know Power BI
and obviously Tableau.
and also Tableau, exactly. And that's why in the current version, I still do it in the old tools. Maybe in the next presentation, I'll use the new ones there.
It's just good to mention. So you didn't have to. And anyone who doesn't see the nostalgia shouldn't get too dismissive now. But of
How is
course,
it going here in terms of
more
functionality? Exactly. Now we have the employee here, and they are now mapped against various fact tables. So the order fact detail, the order fact, and based on the structure we now have in the fact tables. And based on these hierarchies, MicroStrategy then resolves the SQL
and
generator.
maybe this is no.
This is really a complete database model, like a real ER model, and not necessarily a star. No, not
That's
necessarily
it.
a star.
Warming up.
This is clearly a snowflake, ideally in the end. Now we have the item here. We also see it in the end. We have the item, which we can store at different levels. That means item, employee, sales, sales figures, item, month, sales figures. And what's the advantage there? That means we can use aggregates in MicroStrategy, which is a significant advantage for performance. Why? Ja, das ist mehr so. Normally in analysis, we start at a high level because of more land, region, revenue. Then we drill down. We take a region, we might take a product subcategory, and then we drill down. When we drill down, we have the advantage that we get more conditions and thereby restrict the data.
Yes.
One of the key advantages, I'll go into this in more detail later, is the SQL generation. And I'd like to leave it at that for now and show what MicroStrategy actually does. We've selected call center and month here. We want to group by these. We have costs, profit, and revenue. And now we want to define a filter. For example, we're only interested in customers, let's say, who have a larger revenue than $5,000 or $2,000 or euros. We can now say on which level we want that. As I said, only on the customer level, and now I'll choose the customer here. I'll run the thing, and now the whole thing is churning and goes against the database and has generated some SQL. Some SQL, I say that intentionally because we can take a look at that too.
Yes, it's basically a query. It could also be a visualization within sports.
This is actually comparable in Power BI to an import table. It primarily depends on the root types. Based on this data set, we can then build dossiers, dashboards, and other things.
Okay. But this will be in MicroStrategy, which means the table we just briefly saw
cached.
will
Everything
be
will be cached
somewhere in MicroStrategy.
I can address that right away. Let's quickly switch to the SQL.
3.
First, we filter for customers who have more than 2,000 euros or dollars in revenue and write this into this temp table. So now we have said call center name, the month. That's what we want to copy. Now we have our sales, the revenue calculation, and we get it from the fact table A11, as we see here. We join with the customer against the previously created temporary table, which we filter through, and that's how we get the numbers.
Okay. And that happens during the query against the data warehouse or the database. But you had these meta infos in MicroStrategy before, right? Exactly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to click it together so quickly with drag and drop,
almost,
like
almost,
a no-code SQL generator.
Almost. There are two ways we can create reports in MicroStrategy. We can create them from scratch, or in this case, depending on the permissions. Let's take a quick look. It's one of those demo effects again. Here it is. Okay. Now I have my attributes here and I want to extend this, for example, to what could we do now? Let's take IR products and take the category. This might take a little while because, as I said, actually quickly back. Now we see
everything is a
roughly.
bit slower in the stream anyway. That's totally fine.
Good point.
It wouldn't be any different for me.
Good points. Now let's get back into SQL.
Right.
The filter has remained the same because we said we only want the sales from customers with more than 2,000 euros. What has changed, however, is the advertising condition, the group condition, where we now have the category in. And that's the real advantage of MicroStrategy, that we can generate SQL on the fly based on the semantic layer. Exactly.
Okay. Which also means you can't do transformations that can't be translated into SQL.
What do you mean?
We would like
okay,
to do it.
with that.
Yeah, for example, an individual index. So you want to pull a table and then
I'll get to that later, what we can do there. So everything that SQL
so it's
has
not
produced.
A critical function. It
All right,
just
and I'll get to that right away.
Technically.
Why? Because everything that involves modeled data in combination with SQL can also be supported by MicroStrategy. In other words, if the table were larger, it might make sense to set an index on the fly. That's a strength of MicroStrategy. Why I did some snipping is, and now I'll admit the advantages of Power BI. Because you work in DAX with the keyboard, you have a bit more freedom, or it's easier to integrate those special touches no one wants, but everyone needs. So there is something similar in MicroStrategy. It's called Apply Simple, where we can basically do things, simply pass things to the database. And theoretically, you could call a UDF or do other things you'd rather not do.
Okay.
Exactly, and and that's why I think the tools work well together. Special touches or things like data cleansing should be done more in decentralized BI rather than central BI, because you can only do that with deep, comprehensive domain knowledge. A pure IT department shouldn't really handle that because we can't maintain it.
Yes. In a perfect world, that's how it would be. But often walls are put up to keep departments away from making changes. It's also why self-service sometimes exists parallel to all that. Good.
Let's move on. You mentioned persisting in MicroStrategy earlier. There are two options. I'll start here and run the report.
You compared it with import very deliberately, meaning you fetch something, and that's now the semantic layer in MicroStrategy on which you build dashboards. But it's tabular, like I'm seeing.
We can also build dashboards. I can show you that in a minute. But let's stay briefly on the topic of persisting in MicroStrategy. There are two options. We can cache. Save aesthetic will need that later as well.
Hello?
I would say it again. So now it's here. I'm going to rerun this again. Now it's almost here. Why? When MicroStrategy detects that the same report with the same prompt answers from the same user, meaning a user with the same security filter, is called multiple times, MicroStrategy goes against the cache and no longer against the database. That means it's that intelligent. When we reload the data overnight, we of course have to clear the cache, but there are mechanisms for that. This is the first point where we cache. The second point where we like to cache is so-called cubes. I have something prepared with the master data. Now I can go here and, for example, build a report or a dashboard. Let's go to the report now. Now I can drag this in, run this, and now the data is cached in this way. I think this is quite exciting, both in Bayman and in the cloud, because it allows you to manage costs a bit and save I/O. That's one thing. Now, if we go in with a nice dashboard, we can do that too. Although I honestly haven't prepared anything for that.
I wouldn't do that now either. We want to stay on the technical side. I just wanted to
I'll come out
understand
later.
the whole process.
We can set up a dashboard. Let's set up something really simple, just so we've done it too.
I haven't prepared anything for that either.
Yeah, we actually did that right away because it's also quite an interesting thing when we join data. Our focus with MicroStrategy is to go against a central data warehouse. Let's go in there now and grab a few things and then get our tested report again. Let's bring in the call center here. Let's take the costs here. And now I also want to have some more data about the call center in the end. I'm going to get a new data set now. I'll take my stuff here and I'm going to take the time and I'll take sitting by the Rhine. No, I have two master data cubes that I actually like to work with. Why? When we build central IT dashboards, I try to keep the fact reports as small as possible and prefer to join master data via data sets. The consequence is that I can control the entire data stream much better. As we can see, we join here via call center and we can add the country here. I hope it works. We can see it here. It happened correctly. The exciting part now is that we can also retrieve external data like Excel files, third-party databases, web data, etc. There are a lot of sources. I'll quickly dive in now and show the connectors briefly. We can join these data. I must clearly say, if the focus is on this, then Power BI certainly has its advantages, which for me is not even that critical. Why? Because I've always preached modeled data since I started. We all know that you can't model the entire world. Therefore, access to external data makes a lot of sense. The question is, to what extent do you do it? At some point, it's so powerful that, for example, in HA, they have data that they are not allowed to load everywhere and say they want to stay very small.
That's why they are safe on their own file share, where they have no overview. No, but generally the goal is correct. I also experience myself, especially now with Fabric and whatever they expand Power BI to a data platform. And then there are discussions like, yes, but still the departments want to add the Excel from SharePoint. And then it's a nice possibility to build data models there. In my opinion, it has to consider that. I wouldn't forbid it because it's pointless. It will happen elsewhere, and at least this way it happens centrally.
I mean, now you just said something that really speaks the most important message from my heart. Banning or telling others what to do doesn't help at all. And that was actually my main thought now on the train, that I wanted to make you interested in what MicroStrategy can do for you. And that's for one, SQL generation. When you've invested to 5, 10, 20, 50 million in data warehousing, the question is, who can access it? Technically speaking, then logically, and also from a security perspective. And MicroStrategy offers really good answers for these questions. And that's where I would now like to go to my
So
old
Gregor
tool.
has a few good comparisons that I'd like to show. As I said, I always try to trace things back a bit. What's the analog to this in Power BI? No. Go ahead.
Okay, good.
Exactly, a
Then I'll continue.
MicroStrategy report corresponds more to a live data set. And the query is generated on the fly from the semantic model and not using DAX and company. So Power BI basically also has DAX, which we can't see. Therefore, as Marco Russo, the DAX expert, says, the fastest DAX code is the one you don't have to write. He's kind of right, but I can then sort of replicate your solution in Power BI afterwards and see, okay, that would be this here, and Olapub is more of an import data set for him. So thank you also, Gregor, because that's very good. You seem to know both sides, which really is one of my most important
Yes,
skills.
definitely.
He's learning a lot right now.
Definitely. And with the idea of direct query and SQL reporting,
Yes.
I'll go into more detail on that later, because I think it's one of the two core components where I see the interaction between Power BI and MicroStrategy. And that's in two areas. One is as a data import feature for the Power BI star, but also if you think of direct query as an alternative, and especially due to costs, considering a move towards premium capacity, that means you can definitely find business reasons where MicroStrategy is worthwhile, despite perhaps additional or missing licenses. Simply put, to reduce costs, now I want to briefly touch on SQL features as well. Here I used a report as a filter. That means I defined a report here that now admittedly does the same thing as the prompt. But the advantage is I can check here if the customer list matches what I actually want to filter. I can also do more complicated things here. I can say, okay, join several metrics together, take customer and product, and it's really a big help. Customers and I work with it, and other consultants like it a lot. Now let's take a look at more SQL features that I particularly like, and those are transformations. That means we have here the revenue, previous month's revenue, last quarter's revenue, and last year's revenue, analogous to costs and profits. So now we generate the SQL. This is the famous report filter, the report filter on customers greater than $1,000. We are going to the customer table here. That's what we'll do. We're copying by month and category, filtering the table. Joining the Ducat tables and then the day. Now I need to quickly check. Here in the SQL path, the previous month is calculated. Now we can see it here in the Ducat month, where we have a previous month column. Speaking of the join, if I get too technical, please let me know. With the join,
Not me anyway. I find it interesting, but of course that goes for everyone watching. At least the number isn't decreasing. We're actually gaining people.
I'm very happy to hear that, because usually when I talk, I tend to lose people. But okay, what we're doing here is the following. We're basically joining, or rather the detail is on a daily level, and we're joining the month to it. We're doing that here exactly. So from the join, the daily level, LU day, Then we join the LU day with the LU month, and in the LU month we transform to the previous month. This way, MicroStrategy can copy by month, but display previous month data or previous quarter or previous year data. How I'm going to spend 2 or 3 more minutes on the SQL. Now we're doing this multiple times against the fact tables, transforming month, quarter, year, fetching the key figures.
Goodbye.
Just quickly checking what that is. So we have costs, revenue and profit, blah, blah, blah. And in the last SQL path, we join everything together. Now MicroStrategy can generate the query in different SQL flavors or dialects. Let's go to the VDB settings here. And here comes one of my favorite bits, like in the middle, table type. We're switching now to the mature table. Now we have a single query against the database. And that was one of the first questions a customer asked me what the technical difference is. So the advantage here is the execution plan from the database can really consider the indexes as a whole and create an optimal execution plan. The downside to this is the more complex the whole thing gets, the longer the optimizer takes to calculate the optimal path. That means you can set this setting at a project level, and then you basically need a way to roughly estimate what's better now. There will always be individual cases that deviate from this, and then we can change it again at the report level.
Any questions about that? Nothing from outside at the moment,
okay,
but
let's
I'm
leave it
not
at that for
even
now.
suggesting to follow this query in detail, but it's just cool to see what complex constructs are nullified.
What also works, maybe it's the VFD index that you mentioned earlier. I'll rearrange this a bit.
Cool.
This is something where I'm not sure if it works in combination with the PostgreSQL database, but I'll just try it here. And now he's doing it. That means we can also optimize the SQL by creating indexes. I think it will become less important, but in detail still important, because in the end, you need such features to access data quickly and efficiently.
Yes, so you have to say that since everything is SQL, the vendor lock-in isn't too big because it could look different.
Yes, that's
elsewhere.
an interesting point. There are some customers who have changed their database over time.
Okay,
so
and
that means
then
it works too. The SQL wouldn't be generated like PostgreSQL anymore, but for example, Snowflake.
Gregor also mentioned the topic of the metadata repository.
More specific questions on that?
No, just a comment.
I'm happy to go into detail.
The interesting thing is that it comes from the central metadata repository, which is quite clear. This whole drag and drop, clicking together complex SQL queries only works because you already have some knowledge in MicroStrategy.
Sure. That's basically the advantage. Now let me just check it real quick. Now I have this problem here that because of this thing, I'm not really.
It's just gone. You can hide it again, right? That works.
The advantage of the
too.
repository is that MicroStrategy is 100% object-oriented and basically not reusable. Objects are really only the dashboard. All other objects I can reuse everywhere. Like the report we've built now, we can use in 100 dashboards. We can use it in other reports as a filter, but also in other metrics as a filter.
Thank you very much.
So that results in a lot of flexibility. Let's go down to the source. Let's take a look at what the thing actually does. Let's check out the difference between cost metric and the cost metric for last month. Yeah, here we basically see the graphical interface where we can define the metrics. I've taken the actual costs here. Through facts, we map indicators with the tables. I'll show what that is in a moment. The rest is default. Now, let's look at last year's costs using last month's data as an example. Sorry. And here we have a transformation. This is an object. If we now do a dependency search again, I have my transformation here where I basically say the month should join over the column. And we have seen this column before in the SQL. Good. So what we are able to offer with Power BI here is a highly efficient tool that allows power users who are not SQL experts to tackle databases containing tables with billions of rows and hundreds of tables without losing oversight. The semantic model is then built by IT. They need to make sure everything fits together and is performing well. This way, by abstracting the semantic layer, we make it accessible to business users. Otherwise, you would pretty much have to type a lot of SQL or do extensive ETL. ETL is when building.
So Power BI has it all built in somehow. Sure, as a user, I could do more, but I also realized that if we're dealing with billions, I'm going to run into problems or at least not have fun when a work query takes forever to load.
This is definitely one of the things where I give Power BI a thumbs up. If you look at what you can do in Power BI, you can do ETL, visualization, and AI. These are generally three fields that often fall into three departments or even three distinct areas in central IT. And now if you can't do everything with Power BI, that doesn't necessarily have to be a disadvantage. It limits things a bit, making it more manageable and simpler without getting too chaotic. What do you think, Artur?